Thank you guys for joining. Today we're going to talk about um, archives, which is why does that not look correct? Which is the word that we're using for backups because it's kind of not like totally a backup because of MLS and the way that conversations get created. Um, so, so let's talk a little bit about kind of how a device like the local database on a device works right now. So let's say you have a phone. We'll call this like app A, and inside this app, you have a local database. This is the local database that is managed by XMTP, and inside of this local database, you have a couple of tables. For the purpose of this, let's say you have. We'll just list like the three main tables, which are you have a table that has groups, you have a table that has messages, group messages, oops, messages, and you have a table that has consent records. There's other tables in this local database, but for the purpose of archives and backups, these are kind of the three things that you care about. Um, and so you're using this app over time, and you have like 10 conversations, and those conversations have 50 messages, and you have 10 consent records for those groups. Um, so in a previous like talk, I talked about history sync and history transfer, and kind of the situation where like okay, you have app A or app B. Oops. And you decide to get an iPad. So this is your iPhone, and now you get an iPad. And so this is installation A, and now you have installation B, and they're logged in on the same inbox ID. And we have this history sync server that like when you first log in and you call sync enough times, you can get all of your group's messages and consent on this iPad. But that involves this like history sync server and this like dance where you're transferring things. So what if you just want to export everything on your iPhone and import it into your iPad in just like one fail swoop? So we're releasing a few new functionalities that are this kind of archive. So the first one is a a call to create archive. So the create archive uh, has a couple of parameters. One is the location that you want to put this. So this is like the path to this file uh, that you're going to upload. So like you can imagine you're like, hey, I'm going to do this on the iCloud, or hey, I'm going to do this on my centralized backend or whatever. You have a path to a file. The next thing is a 32-byte encryption key. And this is just so the local database on your phone uh, stores everything unencrypted, but then has like a layer of encryption on top of it to encrypt it. So when you export it, it's kind of unencrypted, and then you would have this 32-byte encryption key to re-encrypt it, so that you don't just store your messages in plain text where in your iCloud. So then you would have an encryption key that's 32 bytes. And then the last option is this like it's called options. If it's left blank, it's optional. Options is optional. If it's left blank, it'll just take all of your messages, all of your consent, everything, all of this stuff, and it'll upload it. But as you can imagine, that could be like 4 GB of information or something. I don't know, that maybe that's a really large number. Um, and so we give you the option to give a start date and an end date, and also type. So you could be like, I just want my consent records, I just want my messages, and you can kind of specify, consent or messages as whatever it is. Like maybe you don't want to export consent, you just want the messages, whatever. And then the start date and end date is like you could do like maybe like a rolling archive or like a rolling backup, or you could do periods of time where you could be like, okay, I want to just back up for the last 3 months, or I want to back up for, the last 1 month or whatever. So you can start a start date and end date, and then you can also maybe do like a rolling archive where, if you're using the iCloud up here, um, you could have, oh, here's your messages and consent for for these dates, and here's your messaging and consent for these dates, and you can kind of have like a rolling backup, so that like if somebody throws their phone into the ocean and gets a new phone, that they can go to their iCloud and be like, oh, I would like these two archives, or I'd like just this one, or I'd like all three, or you have like a rolling history of states of this device. So yeah, so when you're creating the archive, you kind of have some control over what you're exporting. So yeah, so that's what happens when you call create. And so now you've created this archive, it's living up here in the cloud, and now you're like, okay, I just got this new iPad, I have no messages, my maybe my groups have showed up by now because of the way that your new installation gets added to groups, and you have maybe you have your consent too at this point because of the way that kind of consent can come in as well, but you don't have any of your messages. And so then you could go, okay, let's see what kind of archives I have. So it'll go up here and it'll be like, here's, archive, 1, 2, whatever, 3. And you have the path to these files. So you go up into your archive and you're like, hey, give me the archive metadata for, for, um, for number 1, path 1. And here's the encryption key because I have it. And just give me the information about this archive. And so this is so you can, one, show to the user, okay, this archive includes information. This archive was created at this date, so it has like a created at date. So like, oh, this archive was archived, in December. And then it'll tell you like the start and end date, so you can see what the chunk of time was that this archive was created. It'll also tell you information about if it's just consent or messages or whatever. And so you can get a little bit of information about the archive to inform your decision of what you want to do with it. Because you have the path, you can also use just like a file manager to get the size. That might be something that a user would like. We don't include that in our metadata, but that's like a really easy thing to get from a file manager. You could be like, hey, iCloud, how big is this file? And then it could be like, hey, you're going to download 3 GB or whatever, 400 megabytes. I don't know, whatever. I don't know what a actual size of this is going to be. Um, and so the user can be like, I don't want to, download that big of a file or import that into this or whatever. So so that's what the archive metadata does. So after you've looked at the metadata and you've kind of selected which one of these you might want, or which several of these you want, then you would call the last function, which is import archive. An import archive takes the path file again and the encryption key, and it just takes this from the cloud or wherever it is that you've imported it, and it'll put it into your new local database. Or maybe it's not a new local database. It'll just stick it into your local database. So it'll take that, whatever file it was, and it'll insert all the messages and all the consent states and all your groups. So that's kind of the flow for how an archive works. But let's talk about the specifics. So now you have imported this archive, and an archive is additive. It's not like replaceable. So like so you took this, your archive up here, and you put it into this database, and maybe this database already had like 15 messages in it. It would just add, the new messages, or put them, above it or whatever. Like it's not destructive, and it's additive. So you upload this archive, and then you had a different archive in here, and you could also like, insert that one in here too. So you have more more options for um kind of the the way that you import your archives. But okay, so now you imported this archive and you're on this device, your iPad, and you no longer have access to your iPhone or for whatever reason. Um, what's going to happen, and this is why we call this archives instead of backups, is that you're going to see a list of conversations, right? You're going to have all these conversations show up after your archive completes, and none of them are going to be active. The way that MLS works is, right, you have this tree of essentially installations of in this group. So this is a group. And right here is your iPhone in this tree. This is very simplified. Now you have this iPad, and we need to add your iPad to this tree. So we need to add your iPad as a member to this tree for you to have the keys to encrypt and decrypt messages in this group. So you can't see anything in this group until you're added. And so nobody is online. Your iPhone isn't online anymore. Everybody in this group is sleeping. For whatever reason, nobody has come online to find out that your new installation exists and to add you to this tree. So you can see the group, you can see all the messages in the group. These are all like local calls to your local database, right? They don't hit the network. But if you would like to send a message, so like if we're looking, like if this is the nodes, like if this is the network, if this is like the network, like all of this stuff happens locally, like list messages, list conversations, etc. But let's say you want to send a message in this group. So you click into this group and you call like send message. Well, that's going to hit the network and you're going to get an error. It's going to error because it's going to say, hey, this group is inactive. It's going to say, hey, you don't actually exist in this group tree right now. So you can't send a message in it because you don't have the ability to encrypt the message to even be able to send it. Um, and so you're going to have a bunch of conversations that are technically inactive and are kind of in this holding pattern waiting for um, somebody in the group to come online and to add your new installation. Uh, so for really active groups, like if you're in a group where a lot of people are talking, this should be instant. You shouldn't even notice this in active state because you'll get added pretty instantly. If you have, device sync, history sync enabled, and another phone online, another installation, this will be super instant. Like you just open your iPhone and all of a sudden all of your groups go from inactive to active. We do have a method on groups and DMs that you can call that's like DM is active, which checks the state so you can tell if the group or the DM is active before um, you can show it in a different, maybe a grayed out state or whatever. And this is active call is also what you call when you get removed from a group. Like a group will show as inactive if you don't exist in this tree. So like if somebody removes you from the group, it removes this, it rotates the keys and you would show as inactive. And is active would be false. Um, so yeah, so for really super active groups, this will happen instantly. If you have an installation online, it'll happen instantly. For maybe conversations that aren't quite as active, there might be a delay or maybe this may stay inactive forever. So this is for groups. So what about DMs? So DMs are a little bit of a special anomaly here in the sense that like if if I have a bunch of DMs with like user A and user B. So I'm user A and I have a DM with user B and I have a DM with user C and D. Um, these are technically groups under the hood, but they're very, very specific groups that only allow a membership of 2 inbox IDs. Technically, you can have multiple installations, so your membership could actually be, if you each have 20 installations, you could have, you know, 20 members in this group. Like 20 installations in this group, even if you only have 2 inboxes. So technically under the hood, a DM is a group. It's a group of installations who are communicating, but it does have a very strict requirement on there being only 2 members, 2 inboxes. And so I think I've talked a little bit about duplicate DMs before. So if you were to get a duplicate DM, we stitch those DMs together, um, and so that it looks like just one DM. So in the scenario of archives, if you have, three DMs like this, and all three of these DMs are inactive because these three people haven't come online and you don't have another installation, you can actually call, like you can call find or create DM, um, and with, user B, and this will create a duplicate, right? Because you already have one, but it'll create a duplicate DM and it'll stitch it. And it'll stitch with your previous DM, and it'll immediately turn it from inactive to active. And so now you'll have an active DM. So really the state of archives, of this not having instant access to a group after you've imported them is hopefully going to be a very small subset of groups. DMs have this great workaround. You should hopefully never be in a scenario where your DM is inactive, because you can always just create a new one and it'll stitch. For groups that are super active, it should be almost instantly. And for groups that are not active, that would be your state where you would get, a subset of groups that aren't interactable with. So what am I missing? Or does anyone have any questions? Have I covered the bulk of archives here?
I think you've covered all the main items. I guess one question I would have is for like an integrator, how do we recommend they would surface an active group, or how would they like detect it? And then maybe like how would they kind of like display that to a user?
Yeah. So I mean, it's up to them how they would do this. I mean, we already have the inactive state if you get removed from a group. So like a few things to note is that inactive groups don't get streamed, inactive groups don't get uh synced and sync all. Um and so yeah, so I would recommend graying it out, right? Because any call to the network is going to error anyways. So I would just check, is this group active? And if it isn't active, then I would just show like a grayed out state, like, hey, um, like this group is waiting for re-add, or like this group is pending, or this is in read only mode until you are re-added, or like you're no longer currently a member of this group. Yeah, it's an interesting case.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I saw another question here. For the case where you have lost access to the first device, how do you get the archive encryption key on the second device? Yeah, so this was a great question that actually I think Jeha had asked in the docs. Um, so I think that I would store the encryption key up here on the note on the cloud as well. Um, for your archive, like it would be like a separate file on your iCloud that's like, this is the encryption key and then this is the archive, and they would kind of live together. Um, the other option would be, since it is a 32 byte array, it's possible you could do some sort of logic, and I'd have to think more about this, but you could be like, hey, enter your 4-digit PIN, and then you could change, if your 4-digit PIN is like 111, you could like, add, you know, all zeros, and then whatever the 4 digits are, and this would be your encryption key. So I think like you could put it on the user, like, hey, remember your PIN, and then you would just have some sort of logic that's like, okay, we take the 4 digits and we turn it into a 32 byte array. Um, and then it would be on the user to like remember their PIN, which would be their encryption key, or it would be to store that up on the cloud. I don't know if anyone else has other ideas, but that's kind of was my thought, was like, it feels like when storing something on an iCloud, it would be more uh, like a user idiomatic to like give them a pin that they have to remember, that they have to remember. Um, not on the application itself to remember it. Because in theory, I mean, this is actually a great point. In theory, I could, put these archives up on my iCloud and I could import them into a different app that supports XMTP, right? Because it's like the XMTP local database, right? So like for, an example is I have app A on my phone and then, I get banned from app A for whatever reason. I can just go to app B and I can just import from my iCloud into a different app. Um, and so if you do this encryption key as something like, oh, here's, remember your 4-digit PIN, and or if you store the encryption key on the cloud, like I feel like that, giving the user the control over their backup archive. Um, did that answer the question? Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
I was just thinking I bet that there's hooks actually maybe even through iCloud and like your Google account for recognizing that you're logged in and maybe storing keys. I think they might. I feel like other apps do this, um, and probably under the hood, it's like an API from either your iCloud or your Google account that could like store a key for you or something. But
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just a file, like, if we go back to
mhm.
this, right? Like create archive, like, whoa. Like what this returns to you is just, just a file. So like in theory, I could just store it on my computer. Like it could be cold storage, like it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be hot. Like you could give people the option to like really control their archive. In terms of it being optional, an optional feature, are you saying like it should be optional to encrypt your database or optional to store it somewhere? Um,
Sorry, I'll just try and talk. Um, yeah, I think the app developer should have the ability to turn off the automatic backup. Um, because I think the security on that is a little weaker than, like I don't think it has like forward secrecy or post-compromise security. Um, but I can imagine a lot of app developers would be happy to give that up in exchange for having portability between devices.
so, so the encryption key would be optional or not optional, or this doesn't have to do with the encryption key.
No, this isn't about the encryption key. I think this is about backing up. Well, this is about having automatic regular archive
Oh,
uploads. Yeah.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Um, yeah, it probably would be, at least I think how other messaging apps do it is like it's configurable. Like you get to, as the user, you get to choose if you want your stuff to be incrementally backed up. Um, uh, so yeah, I think it would be up to the app developer if they would want that. Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be turned on by default. Yeah, like history sync is a little bit safer in that scenario, like history transfer, because it's like a one-time uh, sort of upload. The reason why history transfer is a little bit more like has less control is that you don't get to choose like a start date and an end date. Like maybe I don't want the last 3 years of messages, maybe I just want the last 3 months of messages. Whereas like history transfer in its current form, I know we have an XIP open for this, um, uploads everything from all of time, and it doesn't give you a great, oh, this is actually a great point. It doesn't give you a great indication of like the size of the file you're about to download and the time it was going to take to download that file. Um, and so yeah, this is like in the XIP, if you read the XIP about archives, the improvement here, this is what's already done, what I kind of talked about today. There is some improvement here where I've outlined kind of a way to get progress of like, here's the progress of your archive being created. And so you could kind of, oh, it's going to take a long time, or, this is, a slow process. Like, I think that create archive 2 improvements here would be like, I'd like to see the size of the file I'm about to archive before I proceed. Just in case I'm like, oh yeah, I want all of my messages. And then I see that it's like 10 gigabytes or something. And then I could be like, oh, actually, maybe I don't want that. And I also want to get progress on like I don't want to accidentally close my app and my archive was like mid archive and it's going to have to restart the next time I open. And then same for import, like I want to be able to get progress to see, how much has been imported and how long it's going to take for this import to progress. At least on the import sides, you can kind of get the size before you start the import. But, attention spans are short. Like you don't want somebody accidentally like hard closing the app while an import's happening. And you kind of want to be able to show them progress of the import. So those are the 2 improvements. Those don't actually exist right now. And that's also part of the problem with history transfer that's outlined in the XIP there, is that like it's hard for people to specifically on really slow internets to be aware of when hopefully this should be really fast. I mean, you're on Wi-Fi, it should just be a blip in time. But for people maybe on worse internet, it might be good to know like has my archive completed in both ways. Any other feedback or questions? Yeah, this was actually something that someone else had brought up. Maybe we should include this in the XIP for improvements, is including the ability to specify what content types that you want to archive. So like maybe you only want to archive your text content types instead of archiving all your like images, remote attachments, and reactions, and all these other content types that maybe would take up space and be less valuable. We could like provide an array of content types that you want to archive.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe one other improvement would be being able to specify only certain groups being archived, just because of the security properties. Like maybe, some apps might make a distinction if you want some to be more security properties and some you definitely want to preserve. I think that would be useful.
Yeah, that's a great improvement. Yeah, you could have like yeah. I mean, the good news is if you turn on disappearing messages, like that's just like a maybe a feature that some really secure groups would have, or if you
Yeah, it's true.
delete local messages. Archives are only going to take what's in your local database. They don't do anything with the network. So like if it doesn't exist in your local database, it won't be archived. That being said, if what Rich was saying, like if you have and if an app is making a decision to do some sort of rolling backups and you have disappearing messages turned on, I mean, that could be a security implication of like, well, that message was going to disappear, but then you archived it in a period where now I have a permanent record of that message instead of this impermanence of it. So that's like definitely something to think about. Great. Well, I think we have some improvements to add to the XIP, so that's awesome. And I appreciate everyone taking the time. Thank you.